Hello, my beautiful, beautiful Exhuming the Truth community. I'm doing something a little bit weird and wonderful today. Hopefully, you're listening to this because I have been able to simultaneously video record and audio record. And by that, I mean, hopefully, I have some content on the podcast and then also some video content to go with it because I know a lot of us are visual listeners. I guess that's what you would call it. Let me just adjust my microphone. So I thought I'd give that a try today because you guys seem to be wanting to watch a lot more things. So here we are. Today we are doing a much requested episode on the little Gus Lamont, and we're going to get straight into it. Don't mind the shameless plugs here. We have an Exhuming the Truth stubby holder, and behind me, I will describe for you, if you're only listening, we have an Exhuming the Truth tote bag and an Exhuming the Truth drink bottle. All of these things are going to be available for sale very soon. But for now, let's just get straight into today's episode. Now, as we know, and if you've been listening along to some or all of our episodes over the last 18-ish months, you would know by now that the rate that people go missing in Australia is absolutely insane. And it happens daily. The number of long-term missing people in Australia right now is over 2,600. So if you remember, the long-term usually is anything more than 3 months of disappearance. Obviously, some missing persons cases are by choice, some are by tragedy, and some are under suspicious circumstances. And I think this case of little Gus is very, very suspicious, but it didn't always start that way. It wasn't always portrayed that way. So I'm going to not just retell you what you've already heard and regurgitate information that you've probably read or consumed already. I'm going to talk to you about the exact timeline so you can get a better, more clear picture of how things did or did not progress, I suppose, in this case, and a couple of little bits and pieces to do with forensics and criminology, as you know, I love. And I hope you enjoy it and you take something away from it. I also hope that you will have it in your heart to also share because the last thing we want in this country is to be known for crimes against children. We have William Tyrrell. That is unsolved and unacceptable in my opinion. And I don't want this case of Gus Lamont turning into a case where we never have answers. And that gets into something that I'll chat about later called ambiguous loss. But today we're going to examine the disappearance of Gus Lamont. This case is an onion. It is layered with so many unanswered questions, so many conflicting recounts. And I'm also going to just clarify the who's who in this story as well, in regards to parents, grandparents, and who lives where, because that's a bit of a grey area for some people. But of course, we're going to examine this through a forensic and criminological lens, and we're going to break down everything that we can. We might even do a part 2 because I don't want to be throwing everything at you, over the course of an hour and a half for part 1. But sometimes the most important question in missing persons cases, particularly in children's cases, is not simply where did he go, but what happened to him? How did he go missing? And did he go missing or was this forced upon him? So let me give you a little bit of a background. I have put together quite an extensive document, so I'm only going to go into little bits and pieces so you're not overwhelmed. And like I said, we might do a second episode. But Gus's first name's actually August. Isn't that so beautiful? So his name is August Lamont, and he was well known to his loved ones as Gus, and he was only 4 years old at the time, and he was actually living at a homestead called Oak Park Station. So this was a very remote property, and this is in South Australia, and it was actually a sheep station, so a sheep and cattle property in the outback, very vast. You may have seen images across the news or on social media of the aerial views. Is very, very remote, very vast. Now, little Gus, he had gorgeous, gorgeous hair, light blonde, curly, very distinctive. I think if you were to spot him, you would know it's him. This little boy has been described as being incredibly loved by his family, and he was also quite accustomed to that living environment in such a rural area. Loved being outside and getting dirty and playing with sticks and things like that. Now, at the time of his disappearance, Gus was living in the household, what we would describe that as multi-generational. So this just means that this is a remote property and we have more than one immediate family staying there. So we have grandparents and then we might have the children of them and then the children of them. So you can see the layers of the generations living there. Now, the station itself is on tens of thousands of hectares. To give you context, that's like unheard of unless you're in a really vast area, such as the outback like this. And so basically this environment, it kind of already on its own presents unique logistical challenges, I suppose, due to its isolation. And that does make the investigation difficult. But you would assume that it might actually um, help the investigation along a little bit if you had more of an open area like that, because it is bushland, but it's not dense bushland. So you are able to see through and walk through or use pole air or drones and aerial footage and things like that, because it is quite vast and quite dry. So it is a harsh terrain, particularly in the summer when it's hot. It's much like a desert. There are mine shafts, abandoned mine shafts. There's a couple of dams and bodies of water. And there's not much, neighboring properties because, if they were neighboring, they'd be ages away because we're on tens of thousands of hectares. So just keep that in mind. So this is not an urban area. This is not an urban disappearance in any way, shape or form. So basically, I suppose that in itself, it raises a lot of questions in how did little Gus go missing to begin with? And this first narrative that was initially reported to the police was that little Gus wandered off. In that context, it matters, and we're going to come back to it because the remote terrain can explain a delay in discovery, but it doesn't explain the complete absence of evidence, and that's absolutely what we have here. There is essentially an absence of evidence. There's nothing here for people to examine or investigators to examine and look at. Now, I'm going to jump into the timeline. I'm going to try not to read it off my screen, but I am going to be looking at the screen because I want to make sure that I get all the dates very accurate. And then at the end in the podcast notes and in hopefully the video notes, if the video works, I will pop up a couple of links if you want to go and have a more thorough reading. Now, let's talk about the last confirmed sighting of Gus. And I just want to say, when we're talking about this last confirmed sighting of Gus, we have to accept this as hearsay because initially, they did say, we're not treating this as suspicious. And their opinions changed over time, and we will talk about that. But if it did change over time to something that is likely to be suspicious, how do we know that the initial recount of him wandering off did actually happen and that was actually the last sighting? So take it with a grain of salt and challenge yourself when you're thinking about things like this, because according to the report from the family provided to police, and this is the very first report, right? Gus was last seen around 5 p.m. on the 27th of September of 2025. So that's September just gone. And they said he was playing outside in a little dirt hill that was very close to the homestead, and he was under supervision of family members. And approximately 30 minutes later, when he was called to come inside, he was gone. Even that in itself, to me, that it's very contradictory. He was in the supervision of close family members, but then they called him inside 30 minutes later and he was gone. So obviously there is an overlapping period there where he was not being supervised. So that's incorrect. So the immediate aftermath is basically the family members are reporting, they're reporting this saying, little Gus has gone missing. He has wandered off. As soon as I heard this as a mum, especially a mum of young boys, I felt like something was off. And I know we're all different and we all have different feelings about this. So no one is right or wrong, unless, of course, proven otherwise. And I do encourage you to have the conversation around what your initial instincts and feelings were, because it's interesting to see how we can collate, I guess, a collective feeling. But it was reported that the family were essentially conducting their own search of the property for several hours before police were contacted. So obviously they have been, out and about looking, assuming they were going to find him, you could say. And that's why there was that delay, but who knows? But the police were actually contacted at 8:30 p.m. So don't forget he was reported missing. Reported to be last seen at 5 p.m., not reported to police yet, and then reported to police to be missing at 8:30 p.m. So this gap is a huge point of public and forensic scrutiny, and we will get into that. But once the police were notified, they basically, I mean, it was coming late into the evening. They initiated a really large scale response. They were all over it. They were very fast, very prompt. They had a lot of different search methods happening at one time, which was fantastic. They had extensive ground searches, aerial thermal imaging, drones, pole helicopters. They even had the ADF assisting. They had the SES assisting. They really did cover quite a bit of ground and have quite a lot of search support. And actually, it's been reported that this search was one of the largest missing persons search operations in the history of South Australia, which is absolutely insane. But despite all of these efforts, now think about all of these people out there, professionals conducting these searches, there was not a trace, not a single trace of Gus. So think about that as well. Because when I want to jump into my favorite bit, shimmy, which is a bit of forensics and crim, we have to talk about victimology. And that's essentially bringing up the victim in this case, which is, of course, Gus himself at only 4 years of age. And he is the case, and he is the most significant forensic factor in this case. Now, at 4 years old, kids do lack physical endurance by way of, I mean, I know they can run around and play, but in terms of navigating harsh terrain, the duration that a young child is going to go compared to a fit and healthy adult is very different. Navigation skills are very different. Environmental awareness, obviously, like we spoke about, abandoned mine shafts, bodies of water, so many things that could have gone wrong for little Gus if he did wander off. But while young kids, they can and they do wander off, they often leave a hurricane in their path. And I'm saying that to you as a forensic scientist and as a mother. If you're a mum or if you've been around kids, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see that kids leave a path of destruction. And even when you ask them to tidy that path of destruction, there's still evidence that what had happened, if you know what I mean. So footprints, disturbed vegetation, discarded clothing, discarded shoes, scent trails, all of these things, at least one, if not two, if not three of these things would be visible to the people conducting the searches for little Gus. And there is a complete absence, not just, an absence of XYZ. I'm talking a complete absence of such evidence. And this was a really extensive search. So my initial feeling was that this was suspicious and there was foul play. And as they kind of uncovered and they did such extensive searching, I thought, okay, crap, like there's no evidence here. And no evidence in forensics is evidence in itself. Now, I'm going to talk about behavioral red flags because there's been a few, and it's a very messy situation with the family. It's very unclear. It did take a while for I suppose the police and whoever should normally report on the case and share whatever information, people were really confused. Like, did Gus live here? Was he living with his grandparents? Did his parents live here? Or his parents still together? All of these things which are natural questions for people to ask, particularly if there's a missing child. Because we all know that if we're suspecting foul play in a missing adult, we always go to the people that are an intimate partner, or known family members. It's usually somebody who knows that person. So it's only very natural for people to have that inquisitive nature around the grandparents and the parents and what on earth were you doing not supervising a 4-year-old kid? So many questions, okay? And there's a lot of red flags that come with those questions because there's no evidence at all of Gus. That's a huge red flag. That's the biggest red flag. The search experts later described the operation as textbook, which kind of reduces the likelihood that a nearby accidental wander off was simply missed. So they initially were like, okay, we have a young boy here and he's just wandered off because that's in his nature. And then they quickly realized, okay, hey, we have no evidence. Um, that speaks volumes. I don't think he wandered off alone, because police then later took it upon themselves in one of their conferences to say that they had ruled out that he wandered off. They also ruled out stranger abduction, and I believe that, they would have had to cross a few things off their list to be able to do that. But in saying that, it's, again, not an urban area, very rural, very remote. And things like that can be ruled out quite quickly. So stranger abduction was very quickly off the list. And the investigators then identified inconsistent statements. Now, this is a big one when we're working in missing persons and cold cases, is discrepancies in statements, people chopping and changing things, this statement not lining up with this statement. And that speaks volumes, particularly when this is the only thing you have to work with right now because you have no other evidence. So the investigators did identify in these statements that there were those discrepancies or inconsistencies, and these were from individuals present at the property. So they didn't say exactly who, but we know who were present at the property, and that was the grandparents. I believe the mum was not at the property at that time when he went missing. So we could infer that the officer is talking about one of grandparents. Now, from a behavioral analysis standpoint, sorry, there's people driving up and down my street on little dirt bikes, very annoying. There's inconsistencies in witness timelines. And when we have that in missing cases, particularly in missing children's cases, that's a very serious indicator that investigators take really seriously, and they monitor it closely, and they will look into it. Particularly when the witness is the last person or persons to have reportedly seen that child alive. That's a huge red flag. So, of course, when we're going about chatting about where he was last seen, well, we can't confirm that. Like I said earlier, how can there's so many discrepancies and inconsistencies in these statements from these people who claim to have seen him last alive. How do we know that they're now telling the truth about when they saw him last alive? I don't think we do. What we do know is that Gus was at Oak Park Station alive at one point in time when he was taken there by his mother. So what happened from that moment onwards, only God knows. Is it plausible for terrain to complicate search and recovery out there? Red flag. Is it implausible for an extensive search of this scale to produce absolutely zero meaningful evidence? Massive red flag. So the police actually came in and they had so many specialists assist. They had mounted police, so police on horseback. They even had the water police specialists. I can't remember what they're called, but they drained the dams. Like, they didn't just do like the scuba searching; they also drained the dams. They searched in mine shafts. They expanded the search radius beyond the initial zones, which is very far because they had initially mapped it out like, okay, we're working with a 4-year-old. This is an extensive radius for a 4-year-old. Then extended it further. Not a single trace yet again. Now, you will remember most likely in the news when they spoke about, we found a footprint is likely to be Gus's. So when they found that footprint, I believe it was 500 metres away from the homestead, they called in an Aboriginal tracker, and they then confirmed that that was not Gus's footprint that they had found. So again, we're working with zero evidence, even though we've extended that radius exponentially. So if we're talking about the investigation, if we jump ahead to February of this year, so February 2026, the police actually made another statement. And what they've done is they've come out and they said, okay, we're reclassifying this from a boy who is missing from wandering off to a major crime. And they also said that they have identified a suspect, and the suspect resided at Oak Park Station. The suspect was known to Gus. Gus's parents were not suspects. And this is reminding me a lot of Myrtle. Do I have my Myrtle book in here to show you? No, I don't. If you haven't done Myrtle, this is a process of deduction that they've just given us. They've said we have someone, this is where they live, it's not this person, it's not this person. So we're just deducing and removing people. It's basically leaving us with the two grandparents. And I know that one of the grandparents is transgender, so I'm actually unsure which one of the two that is. But I know that they also, the two grandparents got individual, separate lawyers to represent themselves separately, which was interesting. So yeah, like I said, they identified that, yep, we've got a suspect. They do live there. It's not Gus's parents. And we no longer believe that Gus wandered off or was abducted by a stranger. So in other words, they're saying, okay, we believe that there was foul play here. Now, there's a number of theories. Let's go over them. Let's have a chat. I don't usually like to theorize, but I do like to use my reasoning and deduction skills. That's why I love Myrtle so much. If you haven't done it, by the way, you should definitely give it a go. So theory number one is obviously the voluntary disappearance. The initial Gus wandered off. He continued to wander off and we never found him. This theory has been excluded by police. It was excluded by me the second I saw the news. Why was it even considered? I guess young kids do wander sometimes. And I guess it's something that they had to work on to rule out. They had to do a search to rule that out. Why is it weak? Because there was no trace evidence, not a single trace to say that this kid wandered off. Nothing. Kids might get hot and sweaty and take their shirt off. He was last seen wearing, I believe, grey shorts, a deep, like cobalt blue long sleeve top with a yellow minion on it, and he had gum boots on. He could have thrown a gumboot off. There'd be footprints, where his gumboots were. He might have been dragging an item of clothing or a stick when kids walk along. Nothing. I'm telling you, not a single thing. This theory is out. Now, theory two is an accident. So what they would label that is misadventure. And that kind of suggests that Gus suffered an accident unnoticed and was never recovered. So, obviously if there's dangerous terrain like the mine shafts and the remote environmental hazards, but like I said, they did check the mine shafts. No evidence. So it's very weak. And those extensive searches that they did targeting specifically this type of thing, like mine shafts and bodies of water, they found nothing. So I think there's a mosquito in here. It's not ideal. I'm so itchy. So then, of course, they've then extended the search radius. That makes it an even weaker theory. So let's just cross that one off the list. Now, theory three, foul play by someone known to him. And this is currently the theory that is most consistent with statements made from police. I've just done a couple of dot points on supporting arguments for this because I think it's important. A suspect was identified within the household, somebody who lived at that property where he was last seen. The witness timeline inconsistencies and their statement inconsistencies. Like I said, I've been working on cold cases for so many years, and one of the very first things we do is analyze statements over and over again to find inconsistencies and discrepancies, and it's usually the way that we get answers. So that's a huge one. There's absolutely no evidence of wandering off, no evidence of stranger abduction, no physical trace, despite being that's an incredibly comprehensive search. And I have many clients that would only wish that the police did a search like that for their loved one. And I'm glad. I'm very content with the way that authorities handled this and how hard they searched and how many specialist forces they brought in. I think that's amazing. I just honestly wish that for all missing persons cases. But like I always say to everybody, that in forensics and particularly missing people, no evidence is evidence. It's very solid evidence. The absence of evidence on that property says a lot. Are there weaknesses to the foul play theory? Sure, it could be that police have not publicly disclosed any physical evidence, to support a prosecution. However, they're not going to come up to the media or just like tell every Tom, Dick, and Harry, hey, we have this, this, and this, while they're actively working on something. It's just not going to work. But let's get into the opinion segment. I love this part because I get to rant a little. So from my professional perspective, this case really resembles a bit of a fatal cover-up to me, or a concealed homicide, rather than like a conventional missing child matter. Like I said, I'm actually sus on when did he actually go missing? When was he actually last seen? I'd like to know, when did mum last see him? When did dad last see him? Not because I think that they have anything to do with it, but because that would give us a more accurate timeline of how long he really has been missing for. Because I don't believe a word that comes out of the grandparents' mouths, to be honest. If they've got separate lawyers and they're working independently in their missing grandchild, that's odd to me. And then they've got inconsistencies with their statements and things like that and their actions. Like, I'm not playing with that. I would like to know from mum and dad, when did you last see Gus? Because that would give us a better indication, I think. I ruled out wandering from day one. And I don't always do that. I don't always jump to like a conclusion really quickly. Sometimes I'm like, I don't know about this. I'll sit on it. No, this did not sit well with me, for a number of reasons. The stranger abduction thing was in my mind. No, it didn't happen. From experience, working in a lot of missing persons cases and cold cases, it is almost always someone well known to the victim. And the victim is obviously Gus. It's been, 7 months, I think, don't quote me, since he's been missing. If that was my child, you would see this face every single day on every single screen across the globe, because there's no way, like, particularly if that was my parents that he was last seen with, honey, no. Like, I just don't believe a word that they say. And I guess the most critical unanswered question may not be where Gus went, but what happened? What happened to him? Where is he? Like, what happened? What do you know? This is a 4-year-old boy. Like, he had more than his entire life ahead of him. Like, how dare people take that from him? We can't confirm we know or we don't know what happened. But I feel like saying, how dare you not try your heart out to find this boy if you are his grandparents or what have you. Do you know what I mean? The thought of losing a child it's absolutely sickening. So, it did take me a while to want to do this episode, but I wanted to make sure that it wasn't at a critical time in the investigation timeline, because obviously the last thing that we want to do here at Exhuming the Truth is kind of intervene or, cause issues in an active investigation, because everything that we're chatting about is obviously all alleged until proven otherwise, and it has been spoken of in the media. I'll link everything, but I don't know, this, like, a case can be heavily suspected and really intensely investigated and still remain unsolved if physical evidence is absent. And that's a really hard reality, particularly being a forensic scientist. Like, it's the people that do the job that I do are responsible for finding evidence and processing it. And it would not be easy for the people who were on scene and the people who continue to search for answers for little Gus, because the last thing that we want in our country is to have another moment in history like William Tyrrell going missing. Like, what the hell do you mean that we can't find these children? Yeah, kind of demonstrates how, like, initial assumptions, like believing that a child has wandered off, can shape the whole trajectory of a case in a way. Um, But to South Australia's police, to their credit, um, they've really done some textbook methodical work. Like they brought out everyone and everything and all the stops. Um, but I'm actually going to make a detailed timeline, which I have done. I didn't want to read it point by point and you get bored. Particularly if the video thing doesn't work out. Who knows if it will? Hopefully it does. But um, there's a lot more on this case that I want to go over. Thought I'd just dip my toe in the water and see how this goes. Hopefully, a couple of people might watch it, a couple of people might listen to it. That's very optimistic of me to think that this has worked out. But anyway, um, yeah, this is sad. It's a very sad case. This case, I think about it daily. Um, and I think the outrage should be stronger in this case. But this has been part one to Where is Gus Lamont? Missing, murdered, or misunderstood. Thank you so much for joining me. It's actually been kind of fun because doing a podcast, it feels like I'm talking to myself, which essentially I am. Um, but now I kind of feel like I might be talking to someone like through the waves of the internet in front of me a little bit. But yeah, I hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks so much for joining us. If you want me to do a part 2 and 3 for little Gus, just yell at me. I will do it if it's requested. If not, I will leave it for another day. But yeah, thank you so much. Love you guys.